Good morning.
Morning. I can hear you now.
Sweet. You can hear me. You all made it in through the wind. Didn't get blown across the front of the building at the door. Or you had strong enough legs to make it. Good to see you all this morning. We are in Judges chapter 8. If you would like to turn there with me. We are in the middle of the Gideon saga. So just a brief recap for you. We are in the first half of the 12th century BC. The Midianites had become oppressors of Israel, and it had gotten really bad. It seems to be one of the worst oppressions in the Judges period, just for quality's sake. God had called Gideon to free his people and defeat the Midianites. After a little bit of testing of God to make sure the word was what he thought it was, I'll put it generously, Gideon said okay and collected an army from a variety of tribes up in the north. God whittled that down to 300 men, and that's who it was that stood around the Midianite camp with torches and clay pots and horns. And of course it was God who did the work and confused the Midianites and induced them to fight against each other and kill each other. Gideon and his merry band of 300 chased the Midianites south out of the Jezreel Valley, down the Jordan Valley, and then across into the eastern desert. Gideon, ahead of time, sent down and asked the Ephraimites, who lived in the middle of the hill country on the west of the Jordan, asked them to help guard the fords and kill Midianites as they tried to cross the fords of the Jordan River. And so they did that, and the Ephraimites killed two leaders, Oreb and Zeba, and brought their heads to Gideon. So that's kind of where we pick up. Gideon is going to continue the pursuit in the section that we cover today. Judges chapter 8, and I'll start just with verse 1 here. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, to Gideon, "What is this thing you have done to us, not calling us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they contended with him vigorously. These guys are upset. What? We're the fighters around here. Why are you trying to do battle without us? That's what contended with him vigorously means in a laid-back sort of way. Verse 2, Judges 8, chapter 8, verse 2. But he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given the leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, into your hands. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. If you have a cat, you know that there's a certain direction to pet the fur, right? What happens if you go the other direction? Kitty doesn't like that very much. Well, Gideon is stroking the fur in the right direction here and trying to settle these guys down. The little word picture that he uses is that the gleanings of your grapes are more impressive than the vintage of my grapes. In other words, the leftovers of you guys, the least, the smallest, is better than, of course, the vintage is the juice from the very first, the prime crop. So he's kind of demeaning himself or even belittling himself and puffing them up, as it were. It's a little embarrassing to think about having to do that. I mean, the reality is it's Gideon that has accomplished this, God through Gideon. And these guys are unreasonable in their demands of Gideon. This isn't the only time this happens with the Ephraimites. If you skip ahead in the book of Judges to chapter 12, they try and pull the same stunt. It's in the days of Jephthah. And they actually end up paying a dear price for it. 42,000 Ephraimites are killed because they won't settle and they want to be the best. You would think that Israelite tribes would band together, especially in a time of oppression and then victory over the oppressor. I mean, what better time is there to celebrate and pat each other on the back and work together? And here they got their fists up. They're going to fight over this. It's like they're their own worst enemy. It's sad and not what you would expect from the people who are they're all related to each other, descendants of Abraham, descendants of Jacob. But Gideon does enough stuff to settle them down. And so we move on. Verse 4, then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan and crossed over, weary yet pursuing. This is an Egyptian, probably a doorkeeper or a servant. Can you tell that he's weary? His head on his hand. And these guys have been Gideon and his men have been involved in battle and then pursuit. And over a number of miles, presumably on foot. And so it's no wonder that by the time they get here, they are beat. And yet they're going on. Verse 5, he said to the men of Sukkot, please give me loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary, and I am pursuing Zeba and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. I pause just there for a moment. Oh, let me get you yeah, it's always after the fact that I think of other maps that I want to show you. This one has Penuel. Okay, he's going to come to Penuel in a moment. Sukkot is just down in the valley right here, and they have come from up in this area. Let me go back up there and I can show you an aerial view. We're looking east here across the Jordan Valley, which is just in the bottom of the photo. You can see the river running along here. And Tel Dir Allah is ancient Sukkot, and then he's going to make his way. This gorge is the Jabbok River, and he's going to make his way up the gorge to Penuel, which is a sister site of Mahanaim. They're quite close to each other. There you can see the same thing. Only Penuel is marked here, but Mahanaim, we'll see in a moment, is right next. But he's coming up to Sukkot, which is down here on the plain, and asking. This is an Israelite city, and he's asking them for food to feed his men so that they can continue the pursuit. I can only imagine there's a pretty obvious path for them to follow with this many Midianites who are fearful and moving as quickly as they can and probably dropping stuff as they go, and a bunch of people, thousands of people as well. We'll find out later that they had been about 135,000 in their camp, and by the time they get down to their city, they're about 15%. So they ask for food there at Sukkot, and this seems like a no-brainer. I mean, there's Israelites, the Midianites are on the run. In fact, they have passed through already, and the guy who's chasing them wants help. And yeah, the men of Sukkot in verse 6, the leaders of Sukkot said, "Are the hands of Zeba and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your army?" That is a no. We will not give you food. You haven't even captured those guys. By the way, the first two guys that the Ephraimites killed, we crossed this last week, Zeb and Oreb, were called leaders. These two guys are called kings. So these appear to be the top rulers of the Midianites, whereas the guys before were probably military rulers. Let me show you just a couple more pictures of Sukkot, since I have them, and you've maybe not seen these before. It's that little mound there. There's so much interesting stuff that comes from this site, but I think I'll just skip past that. You can see how it sets elevated off of the valley floor. And once you're up there, you can see for quite a ways across the valley. This is looking north, standing on top of the site. So it's an impressive city. It would have had pretty decent defenses. And they asked for bread. Bread doesn't change. This is a modern way that they bake bread over a concave steel plate. That's not too different from how they used to do it in antiquity, over a ceramic plate. But it's the bread that they were after. That was the staple food for everybody at this time. Meat was relatively unusual to eat. It was usually bread and other grains.
Is that bound for the city? Is that man-made?
I don't, so a lot of it is, but I'm sure not the entire thing. They didn't just take flat plain and start to build up. They would have taken a little mound to begin with, but I can't tell you what percentage, what the earliest levels are, how far off the ground they are. But yeah, a lot of what you see there is man-made. Over time, they haul stone up there, they haul dirt in the form of mud bricks to build, and it builds up. Okay, so their rhetorical question is, have you captured them yet? And the idea being, until you capture them, we're not sure you can, and we're not going to side with you. Again, these are Israelites, probably the tribe of Gad. Verse 7, Gideon said, "All right, when Yahweh has given Zeba and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." We don't know exactly what. Can you tell those are thorny? A little bit. If you got good eyes, you maybe can. We don't know exactly what kind of thorns they had in mind here. I wouldn't want to try thrashing somebody with a thistle. I've cut enough thistles to know there's not a whole lot there if you try and hit somebody with it. But there are also branches like locust branches, things similar to that over there. But he leaves them with that threat. Verse 8, he went up from there to Penuel and spoke similarly to them, and the men of Penuel answered him just as the men of Sukkot had answered. So he spoke also to the men of Penuel, saying, "When I return safely, I will tear down this tower." Let me share just a couple of photos with you of Penuel. It's the mound here not the one in the background, but the one in the foreground. This is the Jabbok River running down the valley. Here's another shot of it from a little further up across the ridge. This is on top, and you can see some of the excavated structures from this period. There we are again, and from here they will then go up on the plain to the south and chase the Midianites. This is kind of a fun one. Ramses the second. Sorry, no, this is Shishak. Made a campaign up here in 925 BC and captured a bunch of cities, and each city is a name ring. So it's got the name of the city inside of a fortified ring, and then a little head and arms tied behind the back so that you can tell they were captured. These are captives. And so it's just a whole geographical list of names of cities that he captured. And down here at the bottom, we have Adam, which is actually where the ford is at, across the Jordan River, right next to Sukkot. And then we have Sukkot and Penuel. Just a extra biblical Egyptian reference to these cities at roughly this time period, a couple of centuries after the time of Gideon. Of course, Gideon's threat is to come and tear down their tower. Apparently their major defensive structure was a tower. This is an Assyrian military man sabotaging a city wall by prying out bricks to get it to collapse. It's a known technique. So that's essentially what Gideon is threatening the men of Penuel. By the way, Penuel, I said earlier, is right across from Mahanaim. Mahanaim is where David fled when he ran from Absalom. So we've been covering this on Wednesday nights. David went there, and it was apparently a fortified city of Israel during David's day. So these two right next to each other. Okay, verse 10. Gideon went up by the way of those who live in tents on the east of Nobah and Yagbahah. And he attacked the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. We don't know for sure where either of these two cities are at. Nobah or Yagbahah, somewhere in what would be modern day Jordan. Apparently the Midianites had paused a little bit, and so he attacked them. We'll see they continue to run. I skipped a verse, didn't I? I didn't see a single raised hand. Wait, Kris. You're skipping the good part. Okay, I'll go back. I'll tear down this tower in verse 9. Verse 10. Zeba and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their armies with them, about 15,000 men. That's all who were left of the entire army of the sons of the east, for the fallen were 120,000 swordsmen. And of course, if you add those up together, you get 135,000. So they're down to roughly 10% of their initial army. That sounds a little bit like Gideon with his 1%. But in this case, it's because they've been wiped out. Sons of the East is a general description. I mean, you can see here how they come out of the east and a little bit to the south. So this is where Gideon is going to catch up with them. So we're not going to end up, I don't think, at Karkar, but even further south. Sorry, yes, we will, at about Karkar. It's Ozrock that I want to show you. This depression here does have some water in it. You can tell from the satellite photo, this is a dry desert area. There's not much going on here, although if you have good eyes, you can see a bunch of irrigation circles down here, modern day irrigation circles. Or you can Google Earth it and zoom in and see this. But they have enough water to do irrigation down here today with modern equipment. But there is a spring right up here, right about the border of Saudi Arabia and Jordan, called Ozrock. And Gideon and his men would have passed through here. And I just wanted to show it to you because it's so unusual. It's a little, I don't know, oasis. A number of my photos are early 1900s, but this is at Ozrock. You can see the water, marshy ground, springs just coming up here from the very rare rains that they get through this area. Of course, the Midianites are known as people that had a lot of camels. This is one of the places you could water them at. So all three of these photos have been from Ozrock, and even today, it's kind of a wetland area. You would not expect, I mean, this looks like something out of Nebraska or Iowa or something, but it's right there in the desert at Ozrock. So that's where he chases them. About 135 miles from Penuel or Sukkot to get all the way down here, modern day Kiryat. So Ozrock is on the way, but there's an ancient site down here with a name very similar to Karkor, and we think that's probably where these guys ended up. So they had, from the original camp, they had come about 40 miles to get down to Sukkot, and then across the desert for quite a distance. You can imagine this would take some time. This is not a run over there and attack the camp. This is a probably 3, 4, 5 day chase through the desert to get to where these guys, the Midianites, have called home. And so they chase them down there. They were down to about 15,000 men in verse 10. Verse 11, we talked through already. They attacked the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. And you can only imagine that that would be the case. These guys are now in their homeland. They have been the aggressor. Now they've come home. They don't expect the Israelites to come after them in their homeland. And so Gideon has the advantage of surprise. Verse 12, Judges 8 and verse 12, when Zeba and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them and captured the 2 kings of Midian, Zeba and Zalmunna, in case you'd forgotten, and routed the whole army. So he's successful. Whatever's left, even in their homeland, he routs them. Probably killed a bunch, and the rest run off into the desert. It's just not worth mopping up at that point. We never have another incident after this in the Old Testament where the Midianites are a problem for Israel. This ends it. So that gives you, I think, some idea of the effectiveness of what Gideon has done in chasing these guys down. Okay, so now what is he going to do? In Judges 8, verse 13, then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres. This one we may actually know. I'm going to come back here. This is an older map, 1865. So we've got the Jordan River over here. We have ancient Sukkot. Here's Penuel and Mahanaim. And there's a route. In fact, it's a modern day highway, follows almost exactly the same route that goes straight from this tableland down to Sukkot. So part of the obvious question is, if he went initially from Sukkot to Penuel and then chased these guys to Karkor, when he's coming back, why doesn't he reverse order? Go to Penuel and then to Sukkot? Well, it's because he takes a slightly different route. And this route actually follows the natural topography right down to Sukkot. I believe. I don't either. You can kind of see the ridge that it follows, and there's a modern, it's Jordanian highway, I don't remember the number, Highway 65 or something, that follows the same route. And let me go back. At the time they made this map, in the 1860s, there was a site here called El Jerez, which sounds almost exactly like Jerez. So another piece of information that may help identify this as the route that he took. Not that you care, but I enjoy Bible geography, and you suffer the consequences.
Very enjoyable.
Yeah. It's kind of you to say. So that was verse 13. Verse 14, he captured a youth from Sukkot and questioned him. Then the youth wrote down for him the princes of Sukkot and its elders, 77 men. It's always a little bit of a question what this word youth, it's na'ar in Hebrew. Sometimes it does appear to be a young person. Sometimes it's simply a servant. Sometimes it's an apprentice, like the apprentice of a scribe or that kind of thing. This is fascinating. We're in the 12th century BC. He grabs, is it a kid? Is it a servant out in the field? And has him write down a list of 77 people. You don't think that's as interesting as I do?
Nobody in America can do that.
Right? It's apparently a random person that he grabs out in the field, and he's literate. He knows how to spell out the names of 77 people and writes it down. Fascinating. This is a potsherd from a site over in Israel, pretty much straight west of where we're at this point. A site called Isbatsarda, and it's difficult to see without really good lighting, which we don't have on this photo. But this potsherd, somebody scratched onto here the alphabet, and then up above it are 3.5 lines of text. They're a little difficult to read. But it's the same time as Gideon, 12th century BC. What I've got for you is the Hebrew alphabet as it's scratched in, and then the modern letters below it. They're pretty tiny, so a little hard to tell. But what he wrote down didn't look like what a modern day Hebrew writer would write. A different alphabet, but it's identifiable. They're well known. And so he would have used letters probably of this type to write out these 77 names. 77 is a lot. Can you get that all on one potsherd, or are you going to need a little stack of potsherds to write down the names of all these people?
Kris, was the youth Midianite or
No, he was an Israelite. He would have, he knew the names of all these people. I would put money on the fact that he lived in Sukkot, or was at least a local, because he knew who all the leaders were, not just a couple of them or a couple of his buddies or whatever, but he could name them all apparently. So, yeah. Writing in antiquity fascinates me. This is a potsherd. You can see part of the rest of the jar there, and it's a list of names, quite similar to what this guy would have written down. We don't know exactly what materials he used The Egyptians used ink because they wrote on papyrus typically. That's also what you'd use to write on a potsherd. We almost certainly he did not do cuneiform like on clay, like on a clay tablet, because those things don't go together with the Hebrew alphabet, Hebrew writing, Hebrew language. Just because I have it up here, this is called a palette. These reed pens are stuffed into a little hole that goes in here, and then there are depressions for red ink and black ink. It's the standard Egyptian writing palette. You see examples of this all over for more than 1,000 years in ancient Egypt. So how did this guy write? Who had the pen? Where did he find a potsherd or something like that? We don't know exactly, but he wrote this stuff down. It could be somebody had a scrap of papyrus with him and had him write it down there. So he writes down these names, and Gideon takes that back to the city of Sukkot. Verse 15. He came to the men of Sukkot and he said, "Behold, Zeba and Zalmunna, concerning whom you taunted me, saying, are the hands of Zeba and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary?" So he comes back with a couple of captives and says, check it out, guys. The thing you thought I could not do, it's done. Fascinating to me that he brings them back, and he uses this word taunted. I think it's fitting. It wasn't just, we're not sure, but they were taunting him with this. Are they in your hands yet? Verse 16, he took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and he disciplined the men of Sukkot with them. Again, we don't know species of thorns that they might have used. These are some that grow locally. Thorny burnet there. Christ thorn, I believe, is another name for this thorny tree. He took something and thrashed them because they had been so anti-Israelite. There's a sense in which they get off easy. Because look at verse 17. He tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. So after he finished there at Sukkot, he went back up the Jabbok River to Penuel, and we have the very briefest of mentions here. Don't know how he besieged the city, how he was able to take it. He only had 300 guys, but they did. And they tore it down and killed the men of the city. I really enjoy this relief. It shows Assyrian men dismantling a city that they have conquered. And they're using pickaxes and they're using pry bars, just taking it apart down to the foundations. You can see in the background buildings on fire. Here's a guy with a pickaxe. Here's a guy with a pry bar. You can see stuff falling off the side, blocks of stone, timbers, a couple more pickaxes. So this is, if we looked at the rest of this further down, you'd see refugees from the city being driven off as captives. Fitting, I think, for what Gideon did here with the city of Penuel. Why was it that he killed these guys? The text doesn't say. You allow me to speculate?
Please do.
Okay, this is just a theory. I think perhaps these guys saw, heard, got news of what happened down at Sukkot, and they said, not us. You're not going to thrash us with thorns. And so they put up a fight. And I think that's probably why Gideon ended up killing them. Because they were unwilling to be disciplined, as it were, like he did with the men of Sukkot.
So they were anti-slavery.
Right? Oh, John. This is a different site, but I think it kind of illustrates what the city would have looked like. Add in a little smoke rising from burning debris after Gideon was done with it, and of course killed the men who lived there. This is interesting stuff. I'm not always sure what to make of these kinds of things. On the one hand, it seems fitting. Gideon is doing God's work. Gideon is taking the initiative to follow through. This is something that benefits all the tribes. And these guys stand in his way and are openly hostile. On another hand, to kill him? As you know, the text doesn't comment on this. Is it right? Is it wrong? Should Gideon have done this? Should he not? It just says, here's what he did. And it moves on. Yeah. And there's a sense in which these men aligned themselves with Midian. Why, I can't explain. Yeah. Again, I'm going to speculate a little bit. I can't imagine that if the men of Penuel had come out to Gideon and bowed down and said, "We're sorry, we messed up. Please forgive us. You were right," that he wouldn't have had compassion. I mean, he didn't kill the men of Sukkot, so it's not like he's just got a bloodlust and wants to kill anybody that looks at him sideways. So the text doesn't tell us exactly how this came to be, exactly what took place. So we're kind of left to try and put together the pieces after the fact. I can say Gideon is God's chosen man, and they have opposed him, refused any kind of help, taunted in his words. I'm not seeing any suggestions. Yeah. Little food for thought here. Gideon followed through and finished the job that God gave him. You really can't accuse him of doing this half-heartedly at this point. He could have stopped at the campsite and just let the Midianites run home, but he didn't. He followed through. He called in the Ephraimites. He and his 300 pursued them, the Midianites, for more than 100 miles across the desert in order to mop this up. Like I said before, they never come back. So he seems to have made a real impression. or just weaken them to the point that they never wanted to come back. And so that's a good thing, I think, that he followed through on what God told him to do. Second thing that came to my mind on this is that quarreling and division always end badly. Jesus said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand."
Talk about the devil.
Yes, but it's a principle, you know. I mean, if they had accused Jesus of working wonders through the power of Satan, he's like, Satan casting out demons, house divided against itself cannot stand. And I think it's equally true here. You would expect that God's people would have been united and helping each other and more concerned about each other than about Midianites. Was it fear that drove them to reject Gideon? Fear that these guys are going to come back at some point? Maybe. It would not be justification for what they did. They should have been united. You know, it brings to mind God's command for us. We see this repeatedly in the epistles. What's Jesus' main focus in his high priestly prayer in John 17? Praying for his disciples and for us who follow after him, that they would be one. That's what it comes down to, which is the opposite of division and quarreling. God wants us, his children, to be united, to be peaceful among ourselves, to work together, to help one another. I mean that's more than just a thread that runs through the entire New Testament. And I think we see some of both with the Ephraimites coming down and quarreling, and with these men of Sukkot and Penuel, who would not align themselves with God and God's program and God's people. I think it's a lesson for us.
That's among God's people.
Yes. Yes. So if you're part of a different church, it doesn't count. That was tongue in cheek if you don't catch my humor. Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments? All right.
I was just thinking, Jesus didn't come not to unite, but to divide.
Yeah.
But true, that's the division.
Yeah, to divide between those who don't follow him and those who do. Even within a family, that can happen. This is kind of the apex of Gideon's story. And as we'll see next time, he kind of goes downhill from here. And his descendants, it gets even worse. So I guess I shouldn't mention that. We'll just enjoy Gideon's the good guy. He does good work. And we do see that here. But that's not the end of the story. Let me close in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for your word, and especially for the example here that we have of Gideon. Thank you for taking care of your people. We know you do that for us as well. Pray that as we think through this story, we would align ourselves with you and with your program. Help us not to let things divide us from our brothers and sisters as your children. Help us instead to be united, to be peacemakers, to be on the same page with one another, of the same mind and spirit, I know that's what you want, and I pray that we would do that in ways that honor you and please you. We need your strength to do that because it's not our natural inclination. And so we ask that you would do that. In your name I pray. Amen.